Okay, we are going to go ahead and get going. Today we are going to talk to Dr. Terry Griffin about digital agriculture. Dr. Terry Griffin's research and extension programs focus on cropping systems, economics in general, and specifically precision agricultural technologies and big data. Precision ag data and community has evolved Terry's program to include the automation of economic decision-making tools. Current projects include farm management decision-making under weather uncertainty, profitable automated variable rate irrigation applications, valuation of precision ag data, and farmland values. His areas of specialization are cropping systems economics, precision agriculture, and spatial economics. Terry, if you would like to go ahead and share your screen, I am going to stop sharing mine.
Okay. So thank you, Sarah, for the introduction, and welcome to our participants who are joining live over the lunch hour and those who will watch the recording in the future. We have a relatively small group today, so if there's any comments or questions along the way, I would rather you ask those during the presentation, and we may have a nice little miniature discussion about it before I go on. And so I do welcome questions and comments along the way. Sarah, will you and Mary be monitoring the chat box in case I missed that?
Yes, we will be monitoring the chat box.
All right, very good, thank you. So I am Terry Griffin, and I wanted to talk about some of the current research I'm doing on digital agriculture. And it's kind of relevant for this group because we have a MAB student who is a co-author on this with me, Arturo. I don't think he could join us, but he did contribute significantly to this project. So before we get started, I just wanted to mention that my handle on the social platforms is Space Plowboy, if you want to follow along. And I usually will promote my current research as it's released. So I'm going to try to okay. Can you briefly tell me what you see? Because I'm having a little bit of difficulty getting my screen up. There we go.
I see a map of the US.
Okay, perfect. I'm usually a little bit more fluid with my computer use in this, but let me, okay, I will try to go this way. Briefly, who am I? You know, Sarah gave a really good overview. The little purple star is kind of where we are in Manhattan, Kansas. I suspect we may have more of a Kansas audience, could be across the United States or even globally. Given technology today, that's where we are at Kansas State University. The second purple dot is where I grew up in the Mid-South in the Mississippi River Delta region, and I wanted to show kind of where I come from. This is the home where I grew up, and it is in Northeast Arkansas. That's me at the bottom left-hand corner. The map kind of shows the crops that are produced. There's some corn, there's some soybean, like there is in the Midwest, but there are also rice and cotton. The map shows cotton in red, rice in the light blue. Rice is irrigated a lot differently than the irrigation in the Midwest and Kansas. This kind of shows some flood irrigation as well as furrow irrigation. So I have a background in that. Today, I get the question a lot. If ag technology is so good, why isn't it adopted ubiquitously across all farms? I'm going to show you two slides about the adoption rate of agriculture technology, digital ag, that was released by USDA. It's 5 years ago now when David Schimmelpfennig, when he was with USDA ERS, had this publication. And if you look at the y-axis, the top here is 40%. So even the most adopted yield mapping technologies for these crops are, quite a bit below 50%. Okay. Well, I'm going to address that. And the second one here is for automated guidance or guidance systems. If you look at the top of the y-axis, it's about 60%. So, roughly half of these crop top farms have automated guidance. It's still not 100%. Why might that be the case? So when we talk about automation, and I think about automation quite a bit, and we've seen automation across a lot of industries, in particular agriculture, for many decades. And so what we refer to as guidance systems, automated guidance today is somewhere between these two images. You have Judy Garland on the left driving a tractor, very much the status quo of years gone by. The operator has their hands on the steering wheel and they're navigating the equipment where it needs to go. The other end of the spectrum is the image on the right, where there is no human being in operation of that machine. Automated guidance, the way we're going to use today, is somewhere in between. It's a traditional tractor, combine, sprayer, but it allows hands-free operation in the field. So it's automated that manual process of steering the equipment. So it's good technology. And as an economist, we look at the economics, the profitability of these technologies. And we often wonder, especially the technologies that have been around for decades, why are they not being used by nearly all farm operations? This timeline is kind of interesting to look at for a few reasons. Think about what we consider to be digital agriculture today, and then think about when those technologies were commercially available to farm operations. And what I mean by commercially available isn't just that it exists somewhere in the world, but it is available for farmers to adopt readily from a local dealership. It's available to them, either OEM or something they can add to the equipment, but it is available and not something they had to seek out somewhere, in a specific location in the world. Some of the early technologies became available when GPS, global positioning systems, became available for civilian uses in the early mid-1990s. And looking at this list here, the automated technologies, section control and guidance, were commercialized much later than the data technologies like yield monitors and variable rate applications of fertility. One of my co-authors, in addition to Arturo, who I mentioned, is Lavana Treywick. She is a gerontologist at a medical school in Arkansas, and she studies aging and how people of different generations use technology differently, or some of a generation may have more technology than other generations. And so she asked me to add the timeline at the bottom that ranges from 25 to 40. And we usually play the little game of guess what that timeline is. And I kind of gave you a hint already, but it's the age of a young baby boomer or an older member of Generation X. And think about it this way. Yield monitors, when they were introduced commercially, baby boomers were 30-ish years old. And people do age over time. And we need to think about how the different generations, the older generation today used to be younger when many of these technologies were introduced. Okay. One more thing I want to point out. There is a link at the top. We have an interactive timeline that has these technologies plus additional ones on the agmanager.info website. So if you want to visit that link and see our interactive timeline, please do so. I told Sarah that she could distribute these slides so that you will have the links without having to write it down manually. So when we look at the profitability of technology, the basic economic decision is, do the benefits of my decision, here maybe adoption, implementing the technology, do the benefits of my decision outweigh the cost? And if so, then the decision that would be rational from an economic perspective would be to adopt. If the benefits are less than the cost, then we would say to not adopt or not to accept that decision. Well, there's lots of studies that would indicate that the profitability of these technologies is positive. Its benefits are greater than the cost, but that doesn't explain the adoption rates I showed earlier in the two charts from David Schimmelpfennig's USDA ERS report. So Arturo, Lavana, and a third co-author named Tomas Nilsson and I decided to look at this from a non-monetary perspective and trying to look at benefits and cost, but through quality of life and human capital. So quality of life is a benefit. Human capital is also, but it requires a lot of effort, investment, resources to gain human capital. So MAB program, I think all of our audience would agree that the MAB degree is beneficial. It adds to your human capital. But I think all of our audience, our MAB students and alumni would agree that it was not a costless venture to gain that MAB degree. It took time, it took effort, it took resources. But once you got it, it was a really good for you to have that human capital. But since it takes an effort to get to it, we're going to put human capital on the cost side of the equation. So quality of life would be a benefit. Human capital would be on the cost side because it requires substantial effort to gain that human capital. So a working paper with me, Lavana Treywick, Tomas, and Arturo. Here's a title. We hope to have it published sometime eventually. But we're going to, we'll present what the paper is all about. So we started with this matrix. It's a adoption influence. And so we gave it a score between 1 and 5 for each technology. A 3 means there's no change with or without that technology. So for instance, quality of life, if we assigned a 3 to a technology, that means it doesn't improve quality of life. It doesn't reduce quality of life. And the same for human capital. A score of 3 means no change in the amount of human capital required to make use of the technology. But when a quality of life goes from a 3 to a 5, then it increases quality of life, the utility, happiness, satisfaction of the farm equipment operator, the farm operator increases. On human capital, a 1 is preferred. So less human capital is required, then the farm operation would be more likely to adopt. So as an example, if human capital moved from a 3 to a 1 and quality of life moved from a 3 to a 5, then we would expect that technology to be more widely adopted than if it had a different score. So what scores do we use? Well, here are the 6 technologies that I wanted to discuss. Automated guidance is the first one. It's the example of Judy Garland driving the tractor versus the autonomous machine with no humans on it. And automated guidance is somewhere in the middle. It has a human, but they can not touch the steering wheel to make parallel passes to the field. It's used pre-season for tillage, during the growing season for spraying and applying fertilizer, and during harvest, during the combine operations or cotton pickers. For quality of life, the note says it reduces fatigue. You're not as tired or cranky at the end of the day. Your neck doesn't hurt as bad. I'm speaking from experience. And it allows additional activities during field operations. So, if your hands are free for 20 minutes, you can make phone calls, visit social media, watch cat videos. You're able to do something else because you have a little bit more freedom. On the human capital side, it requires minimal additional training. Sometimes the hardest thing for experienced operators is to not touch the steering wheel. But overall, it does allow the equipment operator to have less human capital to do as good of a job as before the technology. Quality of life improved. So if 3 was baseline, we would give automated guidance a 5 for the quality of life. Human capital, give it a 2. It does require a little bit of training, but overall, less skills are necessary to make parallel straight passes to the field than without the technology. We apply the same logic to the other technologies. Automated section control is a way for planters and sprayers to turn off sections when the machine recognizes that that area of the field has already been covered, seeds have already been planted, crop protection chemicals have already been applied, and the human kind of just operates the machine normally and doesn't have to worry about triangular corners. So for quality of life, we give it a 4. We do believe that it increases quality of life, and I gave it a 2, just like for automated guidance, because the human capital is reduced compared to what would have been required without the technology. Imagery. We had much debate on imagery, and this could be from UAVs, aka drones, could be from satellite images, aerial imagery. Usually for the growing season, we assigned a quality of life score of 4 because it may help with scouting purposes. But we also gave it a human capital score of 4. This is the first one on our list that actually increased from the baseline 3, meaning that it requires more human capital than without the technology. So for soil sampling, we gave it a 3. For quality of life, saw virtually no differences before and after. And we give it a 4 for human capital because many of our audiences today, I'm looking down the list, I know many of you, and I know many of you enjoy jumping onto a computer, opening up Excel, Stata, R, statistical software, and crunching numbers. But you as data analyst, data scientist, ag economist, analysts, you enjoy working with data. That is not the typical person. Most people, when you give them more data, it does not make their life better. It could actually cause more problems than it solved for some people. And it requires, obviously, more human capital. MAB alumni, you've earned your human capital to make use of this data. So here we gave soil sampling on a grid, human capital score of 4. Vertebrate application, we gave it a quality of life of 4. And for human capital, we gave it a 5. And we're seeing this reflected in industry. There are several service providers that offer variable rate technology, and the reason that sector exists is because farm operations can outsource the need for that human capital to specialists who work with it day in and day out. Yield monitors, whether it's with or without a GPS, we give it a quality of life of 3, meaning no improvement, no reduction in quality of life before and after. But its job is to measure and log data. So we're adding mountains of data to the user, and we gave it a 4 on human capital because of the increased requirements of managing and analyzing data. Not that data is not a good thing, but it does require additional skill sets relative to without the technology to make use of it. So how does this link back to adoption trends? So this is one of the tables that we have in our paper that we discussed. So Lavana and I have been working with USA data, as well as Elizabeth Yeager. Many of you had Dr. Yeager's class. She teaches not only undergraduates and graduates at Kansas State University, but also in the MAB program as well. We had a paper, and I'll show you a link to that in a moment, where we reported some of these adoption trends. Tomas, he's on faculty at Odes College in Canada, and he has been responsible for collecting and reporting the Canadian perspective. Arturo, who is a fellow MAB student, he is on faculty at a university in Mexico, and he is responsible for providing the Mexican perspective on this paper. And so if you look at the adoption trends across all 3 countries, you'll see some similarities, but also look at the adoption levels for technologies that have automated in their names. Remember, automated technologies typically have higher quality of life and less requirement for your human capital. They're adopted a lot more readily than the data technologies that are opposite on the human capital requirements. Have there been any questions, or is the audience kind of quietly eating their lunch at their desks?
There have been no questions so far.
Okay. So the paper I mentioned, this one is with Lavana and Beth, Dr. Trawick and Dr. Yeager. We presented this to the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City Ag Symposium last year, maybe 2 years ago, and it was published 2021. And we approached some of this topic about quality of life and human capital as far as generations on the farm. You know, in Kansas, we have a handful of Generation Z members who are running farms. We have Gen X and millennials and baby boomers, and as well as the silent generation. Currently, majority, maybe half of farm operations in Kansas are operated by members of the baby boomer generation. But the fastest growing cohort is the millennial. They're increasing at the fastest rate, much faster than Gen X and Gen Z. So I invite you to take a look at this paper and read it. It was written for the Federal Reserve Bank. It's not as academic, with less mathematics than the academic literature would have. So it's more of a fun read. 3 years ago, we published this paper in the Drake Journal of Agricultural Law. And I teamed up with 3 academic attorneys from different universities, and we talked about what the digital agriculture phenomenon of generating lots and lots of data. And I mentioned that human capital is required to make use of that data. Well, this paper talks about rights and responsibilities of farm operations to protect that data for data security. Recently, I've had a few publications in the mass media about cybersecurity, and we do discuss those issues in this paper. And again, I invite you to read this afterwards as part of your homework. I always like to give homework assignments. Another paper that just came out, and I pasted in the abstract here. My portion of it was about the global cost assessment if GPS, or here I say GNSS, outage on agricultural productivity. GNSS is simply Global Navigation Satellite Systems. It's a generic term that includes the American GPS system from the Department of Defense, as well as the Russian GLONASS, and several other nations have a satellite positioning system that when we refer to GNSS, it refers to all those. And because many of our modern tractors can use a combination of several of those different systems. So the Aerospace Corporation was interested in asking about space weather impact on agriculture. And specifically, they were concerned that activity in the ionosphere from solar flares and other solar activity, that's beyond me, but they were concerned that global GNSS systems may not be as accurate, or maybe even not be operational if we have adverse space weather. And so they asked me to estimate what that penalty would be across the globe, across the US, and we provided information for across the Midwest. And one of the punchlines is, if it's at the wrong time of year for agriculture, it could be $1 billion loss with respect to efficiency. So this paper is also available on agmanager.info. It was written by a group of physicists, engineers, and myself as a lone economist. So it's not overly technical, although there is an appendix if you do get into if you do desire to get more mathematical and academic. So we've discussed some non-monetary issues and how it affects adoption of digital agriculture. And really, you could expand this to not only be agriculture or digital agriculture, but things in your personal life. We tend to, well, as humans in households, we tend to try to optimize. We want to maximize our utility, given a budget constraint. Well, here, the quality of life, that kind of resonated with all of you, I would hope. When we go to the grocery store, when we go to the big box store, we're trying to maximize our utility and maybe our joint utility for families and quality of life. We're trying to do things that reduce reliance on human capital, especially if we do not possess that human capital. So these non-monetary influences, I do believe, has a substantial impact on how digital agriculture is adopted. So those of you who work in manufacturing sector, I do see a few of you online. I want to put a challenge out to you. for the current and next generation of farm equipment. So evaluating the cost and benefits. When it comes to farm data, I always recommend to farmers that it's inevitable, but you're not in a hurry to join the first data company that comes along or the second. If you do not see the benefits of joining today, then wait. The solution should present itself eventually. The fear of missing out. I get a lot of questions about, Terry, all my neighbors have all this technology. I feel like I'm missing out if I do not adopt it as well. And I'm like, well, that's called FOMO, the fear of missing out. It should not be a benefit or a cost on the benefit cost decision. So try to remove the emotion and look at it from a very logical perspective. The fact is, digital ag is not for every type of farm operation today. It probably will sometime in the future, but we currently have many farm operators who are not going to be successful at digital agriculture because they would rather allocate their human capital to areas that have a higher return on investment for their management style. And many products depend on the where, what field, when, what year, what month, what the product. Digital ag, to me, is a little bit different in that it does depend upon the who, the risk preference level of the person, of the farm operator, their human capital that they already possess, and the human capital that they are willing to devote to individual efforts for digital agriculture. Manufacturers, I'm getting back to you on this one. When we think about ag tech and digital ag for the next generation, quality of life will be a driving factor. Does this technology improve the quality of life? Does it require less human capital than the previous generation of technology? And if so, then it has a much higher opportunity for widespread adoption than technologies that do not affect quality of life and maybe increase the human capital requirements to make it work. Automation, that's another way of saying it, automation of tasks. And we've done a really good job of automated digging ditches and controlling the steering of farm equipment. How can we, as an agricultural society, automate the more tedious steps of data management, data analysis? How can we remove the human from that? And I always challenge my graduate students on, okay, we as economists are really good analysts. Now, how can you replace yourself with an algorithm when it comes to data management and data analysis? One of the facts, we're starting to see this, is that Generation Z will operate farms very differently than baby boomers. And I always quote Lavana on this, and I think she quoted somebody else, so it's kind of playing a whisper game. I'm not the first one to come up with this. But she reminds us that baby boomers expected things to be as easy as 1, 2, 3. Well, Generation Z expects things to be as easy as 1, meaning that they expect technology to work right the first time. And if not, they move on to something else. They're not going to have the same loyalty as baby boomers and the silent generation did. They grew up in a world with smartphones and access to the world's knowledge base in the palm of their hand, and not later, but now. So that's going to affect the way that they make business decisions moving forward. So I think Sarah provided all of my information to you. This is my university email address and my handle across all the socials. I invite a follow-up conversation. Those of you who are here with me over the lunch hour, as well as those who are watching recorded webinar later. Are there any questions, comments?
Hey, Dr. Griffin, it's Jeff Bennett.
Hey, Jeff, how you doing?
Good, good. What with regards to adoption, what considerations have you researched as far as green on green solutions, integrated solutions within a common manufacturer, and how does that impact adoption?
I think a good example is coverage map sharing. Are you familiar with coverage map sharing?
Yeah, maybe a little.
So Jeff did his MAB thesis on coverage map sharing a few years ago, and about the same time as it was commercially available. I think it was within a week or two of when it was rolled out. I think a lot in terms of how different solutions are very much siloed and do not communicate across silos. Is that where you're coming from, Jeff?
That usability plays a big factor in integrated solutions as you control more of your tech stack. And so, you know, that I've observed it clearly impact adoption rates and locks people into technology stacks. We see this every day in our smartphones, right? It's how difficult it is to change between Android and iOS. I got to imagine that similar concept exists in agriculture, in digital agriculture.
And I think part of that, honestly, is intentional, because if I won't mention any agricultural companies, but let's say I'm Apple and my Samsung Android, you know, I want to keep my market share. And so I try to indoctrinate my customers to be accustomed to what my services are, and so that they won't go to a competitor, if that makes sense. And, you know, from a business perspective, you know, this is a MAB webinar. There is some value to that, you know, trying to create and maintain that market share. But it's a fine line, because you can actually prevent adopters from initially coming to your product if it is overly complicated or seemingly locked down from the rest of the world. The closed circuit business model for is not new. That goes back to the 1990s at least, and maybe even further back than that. I guess a classic example, Jeff, is the hydraulic couplers. I remember as a kid, we'd carry around different adapters because depends on which tractor we were on, would require a different adapter for hydraulic lines to the implements.
And that hydraulic example, along with PTO, is a classic example that AEF likes to use as, why can't we do this in electronics as well? I can speak from personal experiences. It's not as straightforward because it's not physical parts. There's interpretation in specifications and requirements, documentations, that does make compatibility more complicated.
Mm-hmm. There's opportunity there, though. Is that correct?
There's a ton of opportunity, and I get to participate in it every day.
Did your MAB experience benefit you in working to solve these issues?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part.
I was asking if your MAB experience empowered you to address these issues to help solve them.
Well, it certainly sheds light on it, because the MAB example that I used in my thesis was a closed system. And so there was that analysis had to make a lot of assumptions, right? It had to make assumptions of the brand of tractor. It had to make assumptions of adopting technologies, including availability of cellular data, which is going to be my next question, by the way. And so there were those assumptions could get removed if it was more broadly open.
So you live in an area where cellular connectivity is sufficient to do all of your day-to-day things, but you probably are concerned about, let's say, parts of Western Kansas where my AT&T Samsung phone does not work.
That's fair, safe. We have exciting technology, I think, on the horizon.
Okay.
Not my company. I'm talking about Elon.
Like Starlink satellites.
I think Starlink can open a lot of opportunities, and satellite technology like that.
Well, do you know any engineers I can ask about that? You're an engineer, right? So ping rate, is the ping rate will be sufficient to do that, or I have not evaluated it myself.
Yeah, so data latency is always a concern, right, with regards to birds hanging in the sky, and it is significantly better than your traditional geosynchronous geostationary satellite, but it's not like fiber to the home, of course, too. So it's more synonymous with cellular.
Okay, but sufficient to monitor farm equipment in real time.
It's sufficient to do a video call.
Okay.
It's certainly sufficient to do a Zoom call. I'm not, full disclosure, I'm not on it right now.
I got a 1 gig. No, that's not right. What I got a wire coming in from the local cable company. It's really sweet.
I'm blessed at my address. I have 3 gigabit fibers available. So I have 3 options with gigabit fiber. I have another question, but I don't want to hog all the time. So if there are other questions, I'll yield for right now.
Thanks, Jeff. It's good for you to chime in.
There are no other questions in the chat box at this time. We do have a few minutes. If anyone else has anything to ask or share, otherwise I would say, Jeff, go ahead with your question.
Terry, we previously have spoken about valuing farm land differently with or without cellular coverage to enable some of these advanced technologies. Mm-hmm. Has your area, your research in that advanced, or is that still kind of on hold right now?
Yeah, it is on hold because what we were evaluating was the footprint of cellular companies, and talking to farmers. There's 2 ways of measuring things. You can ask people what they're going to do, or you can observe what they actually do, revealed preference. And we have not evaluated it from a revealed preference yet. We do have some data in the state with real-time sales data for tracts of farmland, and we can look at the cellular coverage maps to decide if they are endowed with cellular connectivity or not. But just asking people what they would do if they would pay more for rent or to bid on farmland, and they would all say no, not now. But there's a lot of 2,000 acre farms that I talk to. And those size farms aren't the ones who, if you have 20,000 acres as a farmer, I'm probably not on the tractor all the time. I may not ever be on the tractor. I may have a dozen or more employees who are operating farm equipment. And in that case, I'm going to be looking at my iPad to see what the equipment is, see how much fuel is in each of the machines, see if the machines are being operated correctly. And that requires having connection to the machines in very rural areas. And if I'm not able to do that, then I, as a 20,000 acre farmer, would probably not be as excited about gaining that farm as I would if it did have wireless connectivity where I can monitor my machines. And that's the same conversation you and I had years ago, but I have not progressed with that data, although that would be a very good MAB thesis topic if we had any of our audience who is looking for a topic.
I still find the topic really interesting, although I'm not an MAB student anymore. I find it interesting. I'll play a card. When I worked for John Deere, I found it interesting that AT&T was more dependent on John Deere for understanding coverage than John Deere getting that data from AT&T. We were actually collecting real data versus theirs was still theoretical.
Okay, so let's say there's a hill in a way. The John Deere machinery could actually measure the connectivity where AT&T was just guessing.
Correct.
I didn't think about that. And then the apps, sometimes I use the Ookla app on my phone to test the upload and download and ping rate when I'm out in the fields. It has a beta option on it where you can actually see the coverage, and I'm wondering if that is crowdsourced information like the Deere example.
Interesting.
I'm guessing it's crowdsourced because it looks very organic, looks very real.
Okay, if we do not have any more questions at this time, we're going to get moving along. Thank you so much, Terry, for presenting today. And I'm going to share my screen. I have a few slides pertaining to the MAB. Can you all see my screen? No.
We see presenter view.
Apologies. Thank you so much. Okay. We have 2 webinars planned for September for the MAB. The first is on September 13th. It is our information webinar for prospective students. Feel free to hop on yourself if you are not a current or alumni to our MAB program, but also please share with folks in the ag business community. We would love to have more people come join us. And then our second webinar is on September 27th. It's with Dr. Yeager. We are doing something different this month. We are having a closed session for our current students and alumni only. Dr. Yeager is going to be talking about some of the computer decision-making tools. It's a continuing education for those that have been a part of the MAB. And it's something that we have really felt that we would like to offer to have some more interaction with our alumni. So we hope that you will join us for that, and we will be sure to get more information out to prospective students and alumni. And lastly, if you are not on social media with us, please connect. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and you can find our MAB webpage at mab.ksu.edu. We love to stay connected to our students and alumni, so we would love to have you join us on social media. This concludes our MAB for Life presentation. I will be sending follow-up emails with the links to both the webinar as well as to Terry's presentation and the Ag Manager site. So I will get those out as quickly as possible. It will likely be Thursday. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Have a wonderful rest of your day.